Well, hello, sir. How are you doing?
How are you, man?
I'm doing okay, hanging in there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm
So
excited.
I am too. I am very curious because I'm from Wisconsin, born and raised here. And I wanted to talk to you about Ed Gein the musical because it's getting a revival here, right? You made it in 2010,
Yeah.
and it now it's being released this summer.
Yeah. It essentially lay dormant from about 2012 on.
Mm.
We opened it in 2010, and then we did a tour with it. We had over 500 theatrical screenings in 11 states. And then we kind of the pinnacle of that was getting it onto PBS and then nationwide on as well on Retro TV Network through Offbeat Cinema. And then after that, I was like, I think it's done its course.
Mhm.
It did everything that I kind of hoped it would. It was a micro budget film, and it just basically lay dormant from about 2012 on. And then our music director, Will Kaiser, about 6 months ago, kept sending me texts and emails saying we really should see about resurrecting Ed Gein the musical. And I'm like, who the hell would take over 10-year-old film
Right.
shot on 720p now with 4K and
Hmm.
6K so I was like, well, knock yourself out. So I sent him over kind of our sales package, which had our critical reviews and some of the accolades and so forth and so on. And he shopped it around, and we had about five national distributors come back and showed interest, and I was like, wow, holy crap. um, and the one that really showed the most interest and really showed the follow through was SRS Cinema,
Hmm.
and it's a gentleman named Ron Bonk, and
Hmm.
actually he's been doing this with SRS Cinema for 30 years, since 1992. And he kind of, their specialty is cult classics,
Yep.
low budget independent films, especially horror films, and now they're getting into kaiju films from Japan
Hmm.
and Asia that were kind of lost. The big ones always get Godzilla and
Yeah.
Mothra,
Yeah.
always get a following, but some of these other ones that have their own cult kind of status. So that was kind of cool, and he really loved it, and he just said, "I want it," and created a new poster for it, which was based on an idea that Will Kaiser had. I can send you that over as well.
Mm.
Um, and it was basically patterned after Gone with the Wind, and it's Ed Gein with one of his dead brides, and then and we call it Gein with the Wind, and, and it turned out
Wow.
really, really well. Yeah, the artist is from Italy that
Mm.
he works with. His name is Max Cave,
Hmm.
and Max is fairly renowned artist. He's from Milan, Italy, and yeah, so it's turned out just so far so good.
Well, that's great that you could breathe new life into this project. Especially well, when it stopped its run 10 years old. I'm familiar with Mr. Bonk. I've talked to him a few times in that. And yeah, definitely really good company, I think, that handles indie stuff very well, more
Yeah.
so than some other companies. They seem to put some care in it. So that's great that you're able to do that with this quirky subject. Now again, I'm Wisconsin native, and I was like, okay, I've seen a lot of musicals, but Ed Gein is an interesting subject. And I guess the question you probably have gotten most often, but I have to ask, is what possessed, and you're Wisconsin as well, what possessed you to want to write a musical about Mr. Ed Gein?
Oh, it's a good question. Um, about, oh boy, mid 90s, maybe late 90s.
Hmm.
I was with a buddy. I'm from Wapaka, Wisconsin, which is about 15 minutes from Plainfield,
Yep.
where Ed was born and raised. and I was partying with my friend Ian Teal, and
Mhm.
we were drinking a lot of beer. Uh, he was talking about Earl Morris and the
Sure.
documentary. He wanted to do a documentary on Ed Gein, and I just out of the blue, after many beers, I looked at him. I said, "Wouldn't it be great if I did like a comedic like musical about him?" And he looked at me like I had three heads, and I knew I was onto something. It was always in the back of my head, like I think it would be a really cool subject matter. But it wasn't until I started my own company in 2007, 2008, where I bought all this equipment
Mhm.
and with my partner Steve Russell, and I said, well, if I write a script, what do you think, Steve? Do you think we'd be able to do it? And he said, hell yeah. And so we started in 2009. And but I've written, poetry before. I've never
Sure.
written music before. I've never even written lyrics before.
Mhm.
So as I'm writing the script, I'm like, well, I've got these lyrics and I kind of know the music because some of the songs in the movie are parodies. So
Right.
I know the music behind it, but about half the songs aren't. And one day I was in my office in Appleton, and I see this kind of long-haired, kind of hippie-looking dude outside. He looked like he's lost. Like, he comes up to my door, and I'm like, "Hey, dude, what up?" And he goes, "Well, my name is Will Kaiser. I'm originally from Wisconsin. I just moved up here, though. I lived in Nashville for about 10 years, and I'm in the music industry." And I went, "Holy crap, this is killer!" I go, "I'm doing this musical." Like, what? I literally, that's how we met.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
I said, it's on Ed Gein. And he goes, oh my God. He was very familiar. He was from
Yeah.
Wisconsin. He was very familiar. And he goes,
Yeah.
well, let me take a look at the script and maybe I can help you out. And so I gave him the script. He really liked it and said, well, have you ever written music before? And I said,
Mhm.
no, hell no, And he goes, well, yeah, I can see that. But he said, I like some of the lyrics and I'll help you.
Mhm.
And it was like, great. I said, we don't have a lot of money to do this. We're doing it very micro,
Mhm.
which most of it was spent on, pizza and beer for the
Right.
cast and crew, because we had already bought a lot of the equipment. But he was a Johnny on the spot and created some really good, the music
Mhm.
scores and the music behind it. And so sonically, I was really impressed. I would tell him, like, I'd sing bits and pieces of the song, and I'd go, "It's such a lonely feeling. It's such a lonely reeling." And he'd stop me, and he goes, "I got it." That's all I'd have to say. That's all I'd
Sure.
have to hum, and he was able to kind of go, "I got it," and he'd create it from that.
Wow.
Holy smoke! So he's one of those guys that has, real good ear
Right.
for music. What do they call that? Not
Mhm.
perfect pitch, but somebody that can listen to something once and then, create it on. And he plays, I think, 5 or 6 different instruments as well. But he's
Wow.
one of those guys that has a natural, talent for it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how it came to fruition.
Well, that's great. I love how that came out and how you just discovered the musician. True indie passion, indie form and true Wisconsin form. Let's face it, we have a reputation. And it does involve pizza and beer. Actually, I'm in Stevens Point, so I'm familiar with Wapaka very well. Uh,
Yeah.
Originally from Milwaukee, but yeah, but Ed Gein, I mean, if you're from Wisconsin, you know the story. And what I always find fascinating about Ed Gein, and especially with it being close to you with this film, is if you look at the history of Ed Gein, he didn't actually kill that many people, but
No.
yet he's like the bar is set for like macabre and just twisted things that have been done by individuals, because he only been convicted of like 2 murders, I think it was, for
Ooh,
sure,
yeah.
but he did a lot of creepy stuff. And what do
Yeah.
you think it is that sparked it? Because there's been other killers who've killed far more people, yet when you mention Ed Gein, nearly everybody knows the man.
Yeah. And I think it's because of the the macabre aspect of it.
Mhm.
It's not only, the murders, but it's going that other step, grave robbing and dancing with the corpses, and there could have been some cannibalism involved,
Mhm.
and which makes him, he's a triple threat,
Yeah.
he can do it all, but it's, he really set the bar so high. Like even the book Psycho was written by
Mhm.
a gentleman who actually lived in Milwaukee, but he was in Waiwiga, which is about 5 miles from my hometown in Wapaka, and Robert Bloch.
Mhm.
And Hitchcock was so impressed with it, the book, that he bought up all the copies so that no one would find out what the ending was to it. And even the Hitchcock, the home that they
Yeah.
used was actually patterned after a house in Wapaka.
Mhm.
So they had sent people in to get an idea of, set designers of what Ed Gein's hometown was. Well, Ed Gein's hometown only had maybe a few hundred people, but the next nearest
Right.
town is Wapaka or Stevens Point. And so he kind of gleaned some of that from Wapaka. So I grew up with Ed, and my grandfather worked for Washera County as the worked for the DNR.
Mhm.
His best friend was the arresting sheriff
Mm.
who arrested. His name was Specs Murdoch, and he was, the sheriff. I in the movie I call him Specs Murdy, but it's, I didn't want to use the real
Sure.
names for obvious reasons. But he was my grandpa's best friend, and my grandpa always said that after the arrest of Ed, he was never the same.
Yeah.
He, there was something different about him. He saw too many things that were so twisted and so beyond the realm of normalcy that he it affected him deeply. And I remember my grandfather saying too that they called him like Eddie,
Mhm.
and he was just a strange kind of a guy, but he would babysit, neighbors' kids. I mean, he wasn't. I mean, he was an odd
Yeah.
Eddie. They just called him an oddball. I think, as a matter of fact, I think my grandfather gave him rides a couple of times if his truck wasn't working or
Mhm.
whatever. So I had this connection to it, and I thought, well, I'm the person then that should really put forth the effort to get it made. And I did see your review, Mark,
Yeah.
and thank you, by the way.
Sure.
That was a very nice review. And but the one thing I try to do was not to belittle the victims. I didn't
Mhm.
want to shame or belittle the victims. I didn't want it to glorify either Ed Gein or his actions. So we kind of take it more of a psychological treatise
Mhm.
on how he became who he became. His dad was an alcoholic who horribly physically abused him, and his mom was a religious pathological zealot
Right.
who, by some people at Mendota, he never would say it out loud, but he intimated that there might have been sexual abuse from
Mhm.
his mom to him. So you have two different types of abuse. You have, well, three. You have emotional abuse, you have physical abuse, you have sexual abuse. And that's the recipe for a monster. And that's
Yeah.
what he became.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that impressed me because, full disclosure, when I first heard Ed Gein the musical, I'm like, oh man, okay, because I'm thinking like trauma level, like just exaggerate, and I'm like, okay, you know what, I'm down for this, but I want to see how this goes. And then when I watched it, I was very impressed how you did handle it and approach it, and it's great to hear that that's what you wanted to do, because I think that comes across. I think people get the wrong impression when they hear Ed Gein the musical, and they're automatically judging it, going, "Oh, well, you're just glorifying the crazy guy who wore women's skins and danced in the moonlight." Yeah, I read the trial book when I was like
Yeah,
teenager. I read that book on him that had the
everybody
trial,
did.
and yeah, and the one with the actual photos and stuff too,
Totally.
which just
Oh my gosh, it was graphic and horrible. Yeah, it gave me nightmares. I remember I was probably, I don't know, 9, 10 years old. I don't like why the hell I was reading that, but
same here, same here.
you're from that area, and I was flabbergasted. I was blown away
Hmm.
by it, and that sticks with you. I mean, it affected Hitchcock in a way too,
Yeah.
where instead of all the characters that he had ever really created, the Anthony Perkins, the
Hmm.
creation that he kind of took from Psycho was probably his most fully fleshed out and the one that he loved the most. I've
Yeah.
heard differing things, but I've heard him talk about that role. So it's really amazing. It's getting a second life. It boggles my mind.
Well, and you mentioned you did shoot it on a micro budget now, and you shot it in Wisconsin. I saw you shot it in
Yep.
Appleton, and I have to ask how challenging was it to cast people in Wisconsin doing a film of Ed Gein?
Yeah, so we filmed at Appleton and Amro
Hmm.
outside of
Yep.
Oshkosh.
Yep.
And Amro has a rural kind of somewhat of a bucolic rural background. And we met some really cool people there that were very artistic. We were able to use their house and their backyard, and his name was Scott, and he was such a great guy and
Hmm.
still is. But we had people that were really but I would always have to explain that this isn't we're not doing it to glorify him. We're not doing it to glorify murder or cannibalism or necrophiliaism or necrophilia. But we want to really make it like I would tell people, it's a psychological treatise with a little bit of comedy thrown in,
Hmm.
and I really wanted to understand how a person could end up that way. I mean, that's the depravity is he's the Babe Ruth of
Yeah,
depravity,
he
you know,
is.
and everybody takes a back seat to him. I remember Michael Blake, the Academy Award winner from Dance with Wolves, saw our film in South Dakota, and he said it was the best film ever, based on Ed Gein or loosely based on Ed
Hmm.
Gein. And he said you nailed it, and which was really really cool. Um, but that was one of the better compliments I've
Yeah.
ever had about it. But I'm sorry, Mark, I'm digressing
No,
today.
no, it's okay.
I'm just kind
That's fine. But yeah, I was curious, and I'm like, when I saw it was shot in Wisconsin, I'm like, well, that's great. A film about him shot in Wisconsin, great. But like, wow. So I'm guessing you didn't go to Plainfield to ask for some casting.
no, and it's
It's still a
a
sore subject. It's still sore subject with the town today, as far as
yeah,
I know. Yeah.
yeah, and it's difficult because I know now what's going on. Well, in 1957 he was arrested, so
Right.
that's what is that? How many years? 60,
Six. Yeah.
yeah, years now.
Yeah.
And you're getting a lot of these people that would remember him are gone the
Hmm.
way they've shuffled off to Buffalo. So a lot of them are gone,
Right.
and but it's still a sore subject. But I always told people, unless Plainfield, you know, births the next, Major League Baseball player or a
Yeah.
NFL quarterback or a president or some, or a movie star,
Hmm.
there are people. It's always going to be known as the home of Ed Gein.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I had heard stories too that well, you're familiar. Uh, Old Tommy Bartlett back in the day wanted to take the actual house and lift it and take it to the Dells and make it a tourist attraction, and mysteriously the house burned
Yeah,
down.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It burnt down, and not anyone cared about it. And the fire department, nobody even showed up.
No
They
one
probably
showed.
brought marshmallows and had s'mores, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
here we go. Yeah, it was but it was so, and I know that his truck or a station wagon or his
Mhm.
car, that somebody, it wasn't really his car, but it was his family's car.
Mhm.
And they called it the Death Mobile, and there was a
Mhm.
guy, I think it was from Baraboo as well, that drove it around and said this is where he would put the bodies, and you'd spend a quarter to see Ed Gein's car.
Yeah.
Um, but I think people it got to a point where, people were up in arms over that as well after a while.
Yeah.
You can't capitalize on it for that gratuitous reason, just only
Yeah.
if you can do a movie about them.
Well, they still, they kept stealing his tombstone or knocking it over. He's
Yeah,
in an unmarked grave somewhere.
yeah,
eBay. There you go.
yeah,
So, and the reason I kind of like talking and setting it up is I'm like, I was wondering, how do you get, because it is, a musical, it is kind of it's got a dark comedic angle to it. How do you, because you play Ed very well, in fact. I will say it is one of the better portrayals. I think I saw who is it, Kane Hodder, so it was not Kane, but just a big burly person was cast as Ed Gein in one of the films, and I'm like, no, he's just this little, he's just this normal guy. But
yeah.
how did you prepare yourself and kind of get you into the character, especially being as close as you were to him and for what he did? How do you kind of prepare yourself for that?
I had a friend who worked at one of the mental hospitals in Wisconsin here. And I can't remember if this is about 12, 13, 14 years ago. I
Mhm.
think it was either Winnebago County or Dodge
Mm.
or Mendota, and I can't
Okay,
remember
yeah.
one. And I asked about some of the some of your patients that have disassociative behaviors and that are really far gone, but show a criminal aspect to their psychological malaise.
Mhm.
What are they like? And this person, he was telling me, he said a lot of times they retreat into their own imagination. Now, he said it
Mhm.
could be combination because a lot of times they were giving them, drugs to keep
Right.
them, whatever, sane or
Mhm.
whatever. He said it was a combination of that, but he said a lot of these patients had such horrible upbringings
Mhm.
too that they had their own demons to deal with. And he was saying that sometimes they would literally kind of just go and be very kind of shy and quiet and
Mhm.
obsequious and kind of reserved and kind of get into their own shell, because there was probably they were probably ashamed of their actions once they
Right.
had a lucid, sober, moment, a sane moment, and they were also dealing with their own demons and their own
Mhm.
emotional, upbringing and horrible upbringing. So I remember he said one of the patients actually had like tics, like idiosyncratic
Mhm.
movements. And so I kind of incorporated some of those things. So I was asking him all these questions. So I incorporated what he was telling me with some of the more insane of his patients and the people that he worked with. And so I kind of just, used that as a first floor and then built off of it. And then, with your mind too, I wanted to get across that the music is always generated from his head.
Right.
And the reason why I wanted that was because I remember an interview, and it might have been Earl Morris, one of those guys that did the documentary on him, about he would get the dead body up from the recently
Mhm.
exhumed body from the grave that he dug up, and he would dance in the light of the moon. Well, in order to dance you have to have music.
Music, yeah.
Obviously in 1956, 1957 he didn't bring his boom box, and so he'd have to create his own music in his head as they were doing this macabre, dance of death in the
Mhm.
in the moonlight. So that kind of was inspirational as well. I thought, well, he's creating his own music in his head. So in the movie, that's what I wanted it to be, that it's his own construct,
Mhm.
so that all of the music is coming from his imagination, not anybody else's.
Mhm.
And even when people are singing opposite of him, it's in his imagination.
Right.
So yeah, so that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah, and you've got a couple of those dream sequences where we get that window into Ed's head, where he's dancing with his victims. And two very talented actresses that I did. You have to do a lot of searching for your Mary? Was it Mary Hagan and Bernice?
No, they were kind of sort of friends of mine through friends,
Sure.
and people would say, well, they're very theatrical and they're very funny and they're very outgoing. And you can always, I think, take somebody who has that theatrical sense that has done, local theater, but
Mhm.
it's kind of naturally buoyant and articulate. You can kind of craft them into these characters, and it was nice because they were always open to suggestions that
Sure.
I had. But to be honest with you, they did a really kick-ass job on their own, kind of
Mhm.
crafting these characters, which I was super proud of. After I saw it on screen, I'm like, damn, they're good.
Yeah, one of my favorite bits is actually early on. I know it sounds weird. Pardon me, folks, but one of my favorite bits in Ed Gein, the musical, is early on where he it was, I believe it was Mary Hagan he put down, and the radio is playing and her mouth starts moving to
Yeah,
the radio.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I wanted it to be as he's listening on this, old school barn radio or transistor
Right.
radio, that it would transfer from actually a physical, space of him
Mhm.
listening to this radio, and then it would somehow have to transfer into her.
Right.
So being kind of the voice of reason or
Mhm.
whatever as a dead person. So I'm glad you appreciated that. I really, it was just, I really just wanted to kind of push some boundaries with it that I think, um, and this is a backhanded compliment to you. I think people that are bright, naturally smart or naturally bright, um, are going to pick up on all the nuances of the film. They're going to pick up on all of those things. So it was really cool. I had a professor from University of Wisconsin who saw it. He was retired, and he was, I think, theater, film,
Mhm.
TV theater, and an older gentleman, and he actually wrote a very nice review on IMDb. But it was he got it. He
Mhm.
understood it completely, and it was like, so it's really cool when people see it and they glean those aspects
Mhm.
from it. They really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, I did. I mean, again, going into it with the title, it wasn't the film I was expecting, but in a good way. I found it entertaining, interesting, macabre. How you handled the flashbacks with Eddie as a kid with doing the black and white, I thought was effective. And you even get the musical you mentioned earlier, Mental Hospital, and I kind of chuckled a little because you have a whole music number in here based not the Hard Knock Life, but what I liked, and I was wondering if it was what you were going for, it kind of was a little bit of a commentary on how mental health is actually treated
Yeah,
versus the way it should be treated.
yeah.
Is that what you were going for? Because I picked up on it. I mean, it made me chuckle quite a bit that you had
Thank
that
you.
commentary in this film.
Yeah, and I did, because when I wrote that song, and it's a parody of Hard Knock Life, which is actually one of my favorite songs. When I parodied that song, again, when I was asking my friend who worked in the mental health facility how they were treated, and he was in the process of getting out of that field
Mm,
because of the burnout, but he said no one visits them, no one gives a shit about them. It's really, really sad. It's
yeah.
like they put him in a corner, and they don't have the family support. They don't have, and it's difficult. He said, we try our best to reach out, but you're only one person.
Right.
But it's, you over medicate them maybe. You're not giving them fresh air and exercise and sun, and you try your best to give their lives a fullness to it, give them a full life,
Mhm.
but you're kind of hamstrung because you can't take them out on a bus trip, let's go to the Brewer game. Okay, everybody, just watch out here. Don't be drinking. You have to just be very, cautious with that. So they're, they're victims. I mean,
Yeah.
and you're, so I did that when I wrote that too. I had to realize that that was in 1984. So any of the drugs I was mentioning in that song had to be prescribed between 1970 and 1984. But I'm glad you liked it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing, just with what family can do, and what love can do in that situation, and fresh air and exercise and all those things. And sometimes they have to be medicated, obviously,
Yeah.
but it's easier, I think, maybe to over medicate them than to under medicate them.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've witnessed that firsthand. So that they get over medicated, and even with your Ed Gein character, you're playing of he didn't get the treatment he should have after he got put in the hospital for all these weird,
Yeah,
all these things that he did, because there were reasons behind it. I mean, as much as people like to either parody it or write horror films about it, this is an actual person who had actual issues that just never got the treatment, especially for the time period, 1957.
yeah,
We think of the 50s as that clean cut Hugh Beaumont type of
yeah,
period.
yeah,
So when you have this type of thing, you're like, wow, how would they treat that? And
yeah,
and I was glad that you saw that you kind of addressed that as well, and
yeah.
I think people will be surprised by that when they watch Ed Gein the musical. But yeah, this has been a great talk, sir. Very insightful for your motivation behind it. And so, do you have a release date for when this does come out?
So we're looking at, I think, August
Mm-hmm.
of this summer for the DVD. They're going to do a Blu-ray, and then the streaming as well, video on demand, VOD. And then it looks like we're going to get a new soundtrack. So there'll be, online where you can get the soundtrack, and then an actual CD. But I think they might do a blood red album, a
Oh,
vinyl.
okay. I'm a vinyl sucker. I might have to keep an eye out for that, because
You guys did it.
my favorite song on out of the whole soundtrack though was when you cut into welcome a world of pure degradation, when the cops first go into Ed Gein's house and discover all the things. When you played that, I will say I love that's my favorite bit. That was my
Oh,
favorite bit, because I'm like, well, I'm never going to hear that song the same way again. you know and folks, as you might expect, this film actually doesn't have as much gore as you might think.
Yeah.
It does have the macabre, but yeah, I am happy that this was brought to light, and I am very happy that I got a chance to talk to you today, sir. This is very enlightening on the motivation behind it, because that was like the big question for me, was like, what would, especially someone from Wisconsin, motivate them to make a film like this? And this was your first film that you had acted in, and you've gone on. And actually, I remember seeing you recently in I Dream of Psychopomp.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
watched that one recently,
Yeah.
and that, because I recognized, I'm like, it looks familiar. Oh, okay, yeah. 'Cause I had recently watched that film as well. So, anything coming up for you, sir, that should people should keep an eye out for?
Sure, sure. Okay, so we've got all that good news about Ed Gein the musical. We're going to do a reissue screening of it at UW Oshkosh Fox Cities
Oh,
at
nice.
Perry Theater, Perry Hall,
Mhm.
in the Fox Cities, Wisconsin, October 15. And that's going to be, we're going to have 3 different showings with live music and all kinds of stuff. And that's going to be fun. So that's on the agenda. Like you said, I Dream of a Psychopomp. I'm very proud to have a small supporting role in that. And there's some upcoming news with the distributor with that. And
Oh, nice.
I love that film. And then, I've got all kinds of stuff. I've got a TV pilot called The Forest Dark, which is based after a book by Sam Johnson called The Forest Dark. That's coming up. I'm missing a bunch of things, but a lot of good stuff, and other projects too on the horizon. So
Is there a website or something where they could follow up on your stuff?
So we will be getting, as a matter of fact, I'm meeting with Will Kaiser
Mm,
tomorrow for lunch, and he's going to be crafting the website, and I think it's edgeinthemusical.com.
okay.
I just have to double check, but I'm almost certain it's that. And so that should be up. Our Facebook is Ed Gein the Musical Facebook. And if people, like that, because that's kind of the best way to see, all our updates. And
Sure.
yeah, I know I'm missing a bunch of things, but it's all good. I'm
No,
very,
that's okay.
very, and very thankful that I'm doing a lot of projects and TV and film. So, but thank you, Mark.
Oh, well, and thank you for your time. And I'm very excited to see indie films be successful, and to see a micro budget project like this get a second life is fun, and shows you the kind of time period that we're living in now, to where some of these obscure films and that who may have kind of faded get a chance to come back to light, to maybe discover a whole new audience.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, and we're excited about that. And yeah, they're gonna have Ed Gein action figure, which is really cool. We're working with a Straight to Hell toy company,
nice.
and so we're gonna have some really cool merch as well for the film. So it's all exciting. So again, thank you, Mark.
You bet. Well, thank you, sir. And I hope we get a chance to talk again sometime.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you.